Welcome to the third session of Thursday, and we have Žygimantas, who is talking about accelerated text and low-code NLG.
Hi. Hi everyone. Nice to meet so many participants. Here you also will see Rokas amongst the listeners. So he's my colleague. So if anything, he will probably be able to answer questions on chat. But yeah, if anything, you can also interrupt any time. Yeah. So first of all, sharing my screen so that everyone can see the presentation. Yes, so accelerated text. Accelerated text is no-code NLG platform is, let's say, too ambitious the name. Let's call it a low-code platform, where we aim to create a platform where people with less knowledge about the grammars, about how an NLG works, could potentially at least understand and edit the pipelines generating text from the data. And that's the case we are targeting: data to text, not text kind of a simplification, nothing like that. So basically we have a database with facts, and then we want to describe it. How we kind of started working on it, we are, for about a decade, we are working in NLP, mainly natural language processing, and started seeing more and more clients talking about the need to generate all sorts of business reports, kind of enterprise level reports. So that's when we started thinking, okay, that's where the NLG techniques can be really helpful. We evaluated a few things, crossed out deep learning based approaches early on, because if we are generating something for business, like contracts, like financial data descriptions, even product descriptions, you cannot make any mistakes. It has to be precise. It's okay to be dry, not poetic, but you have to be like really precise. So that went out. Then we played around, kind of tried to crack OpenCCG approach, and it was really hard in terms of available kind of a base software, because we are not at the end, scientists who can build grammars and really hardcore computational linguistic stuff. So we were seeking for some kind of basic underlying building blocks. And then just across the Baltic Sea, we are based in Vilnius, Lithuania, so close to Sweden, we found the grammatical framework, and it more or less started kind of working for us as intended right out. So accelerated text then turned out as a kind of this platform which helps to build grammatical framework grammars, attach your data, do some transformations, a bit of easing the life of building such systems. Presentation, this is done on Jupyter Notebook. So here is the link. So you can, well, not now, but at your spare time, if you want, you can actually run everything and then see how the whole thing works. Okay, so I kind of more or less described why we chose this low-code approach, because we wanted our clients to give the the tools which are not very too technical. That's the prime motivation behind that. Okay, so we have a kind of comprehensive documentation, how to install it, how to run it. So I will not be explaining it here in detail. You can follow docs, and if anything, you can also contact us, and we will be more than happy to help. So make run command starts the accelerated text, so it's already running on my machine. Once it is started, we are able to open user interface, and I will go deeper into kind of the whole configuration here. But first, what kind of the main underlying elements of accelerated text? So in order to achieve this low-code approach, we chose to go with the Blockly visual programming language. So anyone who worked with Lego robots or has kids knows those kind of the drag and drop elements where you can quickly assemble your program visually and get Python, JavaScript, or whatnot code generated. So the idea is that instead of programming language code generation, we are generating text out of those blocks. And then kind of the main abstractions to achieve this isolation of the low-level NLG elements. We introduce kind of at the highest level, user would work with document plan. So at the document plan level, ideally you have no interaction with linguistic concepts. All you have to do is to manipulate what kind of messages, what kind of expressions do you want to add into your resulting document. So it's kind of a script. Yes, now I want to talk about, if it's a weather report, now I want to talk about wind speed, and then I want to warn people about certain dangers, and then conclude with I don't know, overview of the whole area of the weather conditions. So that's it. No parts of speech, no verbs, no nothing, sentences. It's just kind of this high level blocks. And ideally, then, if we work in certain domain, I don't know, let's say cybersecurity, insurance, then at the organization, you would end up with high level those document plans, which you can then assemble and then create, generate text in various environments. Then if going slightly then lower in the abstraction level, the elements which enable document plans are abstract meaning representations. And here we try to follow kind of the ideas in abstract meaning representation specification, but we are not strict about it at the moment, and we don't know actually. Is it a good idea to follow it more strictly, or is it, you know, too restrictive, and maybe there are better kind of the abstractions here? So in our own documents and user interface, we'll probably have to kind of just drop abstract meaning representation and talk about meaning representations. But still, the kind of inspiration is taken from this project, that we can encode certain business level expressions in those building blocks. And again, this is kind of would function in the organization as a Lego blocks to construct document plans. Then, of course, we control the dictionaries, so that again, where we need to be precise in terms of which words are used for. Okay, how do you describe strong wind? How do you describe like low wind? So everything is potentially specified and controlled in the dictionary. And then the lowest level, ideally the level which is never seen or touched by the end customers, is the grammatical framework level, where you basically create RGL grammars. And this is, we also expose, all the levels are exposed through the visual programming language, through the Blockly. So even grammatical framework level. So you can also drag and drop elements. And lastly, since we are connecting data is never, well, not always coming in the format which is needed for the NLG system. And the issues might be formatting, so you probably want to add a comma in monetary expressions, or dot somewhere, or maybe you want to convert a number into a word expression, and so on. So kind of before even going into generation, the data might be transformed and changed as needed. So those are kind of the main elements of the accelerated text. And let's try now to kind of start connecting to it. So again, the whole thing, the whole engine exposes API. So through the API, we can load the document plans, save them. connecting to the data sources, so that's the CSV or database if needed, and then getting the generation results, so that the whole thing can be controlled through the API. And again, the documentation, full documentation is provided on our site, and that API is also wrapped with the Python code. So that's what's done here in the notebook. So first of all, we have to construct the class and check if I can connect. So if health is okay, then that means that connection is ready. If I would kill the server here, would get an error naturally. So then as we are working, I would like to kind of clear the whole state. So there is nothing in my environment. So here it's totally empty. Again, kind of helper functions to work with your setup. And then I have a few plans prepared. So restore state, and in the state we have the grammar saved, all sorts of support dictionaries, kind of the whole thing saved in that zip. So if I restore it, I pre-created it. So we have document plans created. So that's let me see here. So this is the very simple, not very useful document plan, where we see the generation, house on the hill. So you see that it's kind of the drag and drop. I can only generate hill, so I will get hill. I can also, we will also have this kind of a search interface if I want to quickly build something, or I can pre-append, so the determiner, for example, and so on. So we can do those things. So this is very kind of a simple document plan illustrating how the the construction can be created. Now the interface here is composed of those kind of main parts. At the top level, we have the elements, the programming language elements. We'll go deeper into most important ones later in the presentation, so I'll just run quickly here. So the text segment is the something which represents a block of text, so I can have more than one here. Let's, for example, duplicate. Okay, as always, something is glitchy. So anyway, so I can add another one, and I can again from the dictionary drop in something here, and then I will get you see it's even two paragraphs. Behind this in the API, it is returned in different JSON sections, so you can actually paste it into the Word document, not paste, but kind of automatically insert into the Word document and so on. So set item is a kind of a setting variables, and this one is here for the kind of the fixed text. So if all the non-gray blocks are then handled through grammatical framework, inferring part of speech and then finding plural and singular forms, those gray ones can be anything hard-coded. Yes. So some mistakes, but anyway, so all sorts of those blocks. Then I will go into lists in detail later, and of course logic, so that based on the data I can branch out certain generation paths. Again, I will check it, I will describe it later. Then on the right hand side we have main elements here, like the upload of the data. So I can work with my CSVs for example, I can load CSV here, and you will see this is going to be the data from that laid out in cells. Again, I will describe it later. Then language, so we can support, we can generate from the same document plan texts in multiple languages. That would mean that loading different RGL functions. Now, reader model is also something which we saw talking with customers, is that they would have the same data, but would want slightly different text generated. So one of the cases was that with the anti-money laundering, and where anti-money laundering officers have to generate, based on the same kind of suspicious transactions, 2 reports, one for the central bank regulator describing criminal activity, and another one internally. So very kind of similar, but slightly different structures, with different structures, with different wording, and so on. So we can kind of have the, check, well, similar check boxes and check, okay, for which reader model I want to generate. Then the whole thing of the samples of the generated text. Now, plural samples is because we are able to generate different variants of the same text, the same message. So you would get multiple texts here. Abstract meaning representations I talked about earlier, and the dictionary. We have this should be familiar, because that's also how the grammatical framework handles it. So we have the main term, part of speech, and forms. Okay, so this is very kind of a basic introduction here with the main elements. Now, how are we working with that? Is that in the if I select now something with abstract meaning representation, so you see this kind of located. So that's the abstract meaning representation, which talks about something located somewhere. Yes. So again, house on the hill. And so to define those abstract meaning representations, we go into, you see the path IMR. So here we have our how its abstract meaning representation itself is implemented. Okay, no, it's not. Yes. So, and now you start seeing the elements which are familiar from the grammatical framework system, like make utterance and so on, and also the grammatical frameworks, language-specific functions. So out of those, I can build internal implementation. So if at this level, I don't need any given like sufficient library of those abstract meaning representations, some developer or analyst who is able to handle pivot tables in Excel should be able to also build those NLG pipelines with this one. Well, if we go down into the abstract meaning representation level, we already kind of have to understand part of speech tags, how things are constructed, and so on. And if I then go even deeper, so how the MK utterance is implemented. And so the MK utterance is implemented in the purely grammatic error resource grammar programming language. So this one is language independent. So we kind of can construct those generic make utterance sentences. But this one is purely what you do in with the grammatical framework. So to reiterate, this is the lowest kind of the level of functions in DLG editor. Then we have abstract meaning representation editor, which uses those the lowest level. And then we can here introduce logic with the language specific logic, reader model specific logic, and so on. So how do we handle this? And then at the top level, that's it. So you don't have to worry about grammatical things. You can just drag and drop the messages themselves. What are we doing underneath is we are building, converting everything into graphs, so that the document plan is at the root, then segment, then kind of the whole thing, the whole language is transformed into the graph. And the reason for that is that we need then to connect certain nodes in the graph to the data. And then we'll also do all sorts of things with the trying to infer certain functions, so that if there is a long path in resource grammar, like MKCN, then connected to MKNP and MKN, we can actually directly drop noun into the slot which requires common noun, and the whole kind of the intermediate path will be generated automatically. So we're kind of all doing all sorts of then automatic manipulation of the graph to make it easier for the to do some kind of the, let's say, magic underneath. So then when I'm dragging and dropping here, certain things are decided. For example, location requires noun. So if I will try to drop here the adjective, yeah, see, it's not connecting. So we know from through analysis of all that thing that, okay, this is not acceptable here. And other things like when I will go into the sequences, we can inject nodes for like lists like A, B, and C. So this and is not required to explicitly be specified here, but we can automatically create those things in a graph, and then this graph is then transformed into the, actually you should be able to see here, into the grammatical framework files here. That's kind of the just print out. Yeah, so that's the kind of the main kind of idea and the main underlying architecture of the how accelerated text works. Now let's see a slightly more difficult plan here, and it is a house on a hill where he lived. It was called Old House, and let's try to modify it. So let's say we want to create a plan where he lived with his sister. So first of all, we need a dictionary entry for the sister. So this one here, create dictionary item. It will create this one here. And now, if before we didn't have, it's just a brother here. If I reload now, you have sister here. And yes, I'm showing here how to manipulate it through the Python code. But if you have like big project, and then those files are thousands of words to be added, of course you probably will not use create dictionary, but you can upload directly the JSON file with all the dictionary items. So it's not like you have to go one by one. You of course can delete it, but let's not do that. So let's say that we want to create a sequence where we say that he and his sister lived. Yes. So here in the subject, then I have to create a sequence, and that's one of the lists. Yes. So I can he. Now, what else is that? Now note that he is not the, now it has to be changed to modifiers. So we use this brown block so that the he automatically changes into his. So that's another graph thing. Yes, we are able to, although we have only he, we can understand how to connect the dots. So that's, yes, where he and his sister lived. And note that again, this and is not here. So we infer this make list and p from the graph sequences that, okay, we need this internally. So that's one sequence example. We can also do slightly different things. So for example, we want to say that only we want to introduce the variety of the inside the generated texts. So we need to say that okay, so that's the yes, he, yes, and I want to create a either sister, yes, or brother. Yes, so now we will get two text variants. One is he and his sister, and sequence and random order, where he and his sister and brother lived, where he and brother and sister lived. Yes, so I need to okay, so this is the, let me see, because I see what I did, because yeah, I want to add only one modifier here, that his sister lived. So again, I have to add here he, and then I will get he and his sister or brother lived. Yeah, he and his brother and sister lived, and the other way around. Yeah, so I can start introducing this variety in text with the random permutations here when I want to do this. Or I can actually change this in random order, just to, let's say, pick one. Yeah, so instead of mentioning all of them, I can only say one. Yeah, so where he and his sister lived, and another variant and there is where he and his brother lived. So this is useful when describing e-commerce products, and you want to say just and one feature, either it's fridge is very expensive or it is very cold or something like that. So those are kind of basic manipulations here with sequences. But the main idea behind this is to be able to work with data files. So as I showed you, we can load the data file as a CSV here, and we can also load the data through the API. So API specifies file name. API also specifies then the column names. So we'll have type, location, and guest. And then we specify rows of our data. So we say that one kind of data point is house on the hill with brother in it, and another is hotel on the hill with sister in it. So two things here. So if I create it, again, confirmation that it went through, I can then open it, and you see the first row, a house, hill, brother, and hotel, hill, sister. Now, I don't have a demonstration for those two radio buttons, but the idea here, choosing between first 20 and most relevant, is usually when you work not with a toy example, you will have like 100 rows in or more rows in your sample file. And first 10 will be all with hotel, then another 20 with all with hills. So you want to have in your first sample kind of a variety. So we smartly pre-select as diverse data as we can. So either you take first 20 directly or most relevant, so it will pre-select from the data set all the different rows. So this is kind of a small tweak we also noticed as very, very useful when trying to see how the things we program here is reacting to all sorts of data scenarios. So if we loaded now the data, we are ready to drop the hard-coded things like hill on house, sister, and brother. So for example, I can say that instead of object dictionary item, I can drag and drop type here, and we'll see hotel. And here below, I also have house. So I can delete it and insert another thing. So it will now in both ways, yes, hotel. Now, of course, here is the good place to actually introduce the variable. So if I want to isolate those two cells into something like rename and name place, I can actually drop this one into here, and now I can use variable place in both ways, and when it's kind of, I can have this code reusability. Of course, for one element, it's not that drastic, but still, you can isolate the things and make it more consistent. I can also use standard blockly features like collapse block and hide it, so I don't have to bother how place is defined. It's kind of usual stuff you would expect from programming language. Okay, so that's one. Now again, the data, as I was mentioning, is changing. So, for example, we want to, based on the type of a hotel, I want to generate slightly different text. So let's introduce another item here, description. And this one will be slightly more complex. I want to have my if statement here saying that, okay, if my type is hotel, yes. So I will be generating budget hotel, and for houses, it will be private house, yes. Again, remember that those gray elements are like hard coded, so they are not really passed into the grammatical framework. So ideally, I would not use them, but it's just for a quick example. So, and instead of a place, I will use this variable description here. And now if I am in a hotel, I have budget the hotel. If I change the row based on this if branch, it generates the different text. Again, I can collapse it just to get it out of the way so that I can concentrate on how the actual logic of the text is constructed. Yes, so now we saw that how I can get the sample results here. So think about this kind of the interface here as a developer's platform. So at the end, in the production system, this interface is not fired up. I want my text to be generated automatically. I pass in the data, and I want to get the results back. So this is exactly what is exposed via the interface. So I pass in the name of a plan, complex plan, and I pass in one row, and it gets the two variations in the array. So you can again do something further with that. And of course, you can get the text for multiple rows of data. So the same, you can paste in this one, and you get arrays within arrays with all the variations. So once we do all the alterations, we can export the state. So we will save a zip, and that's your system for deployment. What kind of a package for deployment, commit to repository, and whatnot. So this is the whole kind of a setup, how to work with document plans. I didn't go into how to build stuff in lower levels because you know it's perfectly well anyways, but that's kind of also part of the system. Okay, yes, so that's this kind of a small window from complex plans. So we see that this graph is becoming really big really quickly. That's also one of the issues we are solving then, because it's a hit on performance. So we have to be able to manipulate graph as fast as possible. But that also enables us to do all sorts of things. As you saw, we can check for the attribute types. So we cannot attach what is not allowed into the abstract meaning representation blocks. We can do all sorts of things like here, because if object is CN, common noun, but I can easily attach here noun. Yeah, so I can automatically build those in steps in between, and I don't have to minutely enumerate all the steps like this one, I guess. And the same for, as you saw, for pronouns. So like he, his, house, all those things we try to automate. Of course, probably it will not be as a work as it's expected in all the cases, but at least kind of the our opinionated implementation of certain constructions. Now, one thing which we are working internally, and it is not open source now, but we will do that, is that we are building kind of a prototyping engine. So when we specify what kind of text we have, house on the hill, we specify what kind of arguments we want. So I want my house and hill be like an argument, feed it into the system, and the grammar will be built automatically. So something that this thing is abstract meaning representation is all generated automatically with all the grammatical framework grammar already pre-built, so that we can quickly prototype our implementations. And then again, there is no hope that it will be 100% always accurate, but then I should only go in and tweak it a bit, fix it a bit, but at least for some simple cases it will be immediately generated. For more complex cases, ideally you will have to just edit it. And yeah, so that's something where I would also probably see closer cooperation with what's happening on grammatical framework side. But that's something we are not open sourcing it, because as you see now, the control is through this configuration file, which is a bit daunting for someone who is not into it, but we will probably have some simplistic interface and then have it so that we can introduce prototyping feature into the whole system. Yes, so a few other kind of extension points. Yes, so I didn't talk about data enrichment a lot, but we have it in our documentation that we can kind of alter the data as we go, so that again adding all sorts of going from the number to around 90k USD, so kind of be changing the data, and this is done through custom functions, and custom functions can be implemented with the underlying, and although on the open source thing here you see that it's a JavaScript project, almost 90%, but in reality the whole it's Blockly code which is taking all that. The whole thing is implemented in Clojure, functional programming language, so you can extend and add your own kind of manipulation functions very easily here inside. Then the last previous week, there was a talk about wiki functions, which looks like again ideal extension point here. It can be also connected, and as I noticed, kind of the text to data functions can be added in Clojure easily, and the whole thing can be extended with Clojure kind of the graph manipulation. Everything is done. Basically, NLG is done. NLG API. All the code is Clojure based, so not Haskell, but still, let's say, belonging in the same family of superior languages. Okay, that's it from me. Rocky, maybe I missed some important points. If so, unmute yourself and chip in. Maybe some questions. I don't hear you.
Hi.
Yeah.
So thank you for the walkthrough. Actually, I must admit I did try the thing locally, but I was kind of confused. So I appreciate this walk that you've given us. I have a number of questions, but maybe I will just say this one, which is about the interface, I suppose, namely the choice to use Blockly. So the kind of promise of Blockly is that it allows you to build, terms, I guess, for lack of a better word, in a kind of semi-visual way. And of course, there are some like visual hints about the things that can and cannot fit together. Like there's colors and there's these kind of hook things. I don't know what you call them.
Yeah.
But even in your example, there was a time when like you had an adjective and it wouldn't fit in the space, whereas a noun would fit. So like that kind of information seems hidden in the interface in a sense. And I get the impression that there must be a lot of other kind of type information which is kind of hidden from the interface, which you kind of only discover through using, perhaps.
Yes.
What's your, I mean, do you think that that's a problem? I mean, you yourselves are maybe the biggest users of this. You think that you have to rely on this implicit information about what can fit where, or I don't know, how do you see that?
Yeah, I understand. Well, I understand your question very well. And that's there are a lot of limitations, and we chose Blockly early on in the product development, and now we see that a lot of places could be extended. A lot of places can be maybe not the ideal thing Blockly, and for the very pragmatic reason, we don't have JavaScript developers on the team anymore to extend it, to change it. So kind of is stuck with the version we have, but we have also a bunch of ideas how to, ideally we would probably evolve Blockly into something more suitable for the needs. But for now, it's kind of a pragmatic choice to focus mainly on the NLG side, and then not extend the UI too much. But that's also, when someone tries to use it, they have to have as much help as possible in this complex NLG environment. So extending it is a critical, let's say, activity for the success, let's say, of this no-code NLG platform. So in a way, we need to signal clearly that adjective is not attached here, and it's not hooking up, because anyone else, not me, will say, it's a bug, it's not working, it's not hooking up. So we need to have more explicit information here, of course.
Thank you.
Arne, then Normunds and Karel.
Yeah, thanks. It was a very, very nice kind of expansion of GF to new working modes and users, and also the AMR. Well, there has been some of it before, but now it was kind of made more like public in some sense. So I have just one technical question, actually. So it seems that you are, the GF code that you are using uses the RGL API, and when you build these sentences, so I guess you are doing that in the interpreted mode, so by using the CC command or something like that, and not the PGF.
Yes, it is through we expose it through the GF itself is exposed through the API, and we send those kind of strings to compile and run it. So not the other way you are saying. But
so you're not, that I think can be a good solution for NLG, because it scales up very well for some languages where it is problematic to produce PGF. The problem is that then you have to have the whole compiler in the loop, and not
true, and and that's also scalability issues then, of course. So that's kind of the optimal use of GF is also very much a open question, and then how to do it's going to be as well as possible. So
thanks.
So I'm sure we are not even constructing the most optimal grammars here. So that's but that's
that's open-ended, as you say. So it's
yes, of course. And I just kind of note that we this the whole thing is completely open. So it's on GitHub, has some traction on stars forks. So it's everything is in the open, and then feel welcome to use, contribute, and find synergies.
Normunds.
Thanks a lot for the presentation. I came across accelerated text only a few months ago, and then I didn't notice that GF is behind under the hood. I only noticed this very clever and practical approach to using AMR. And well, as you already mentioned, you're just using this idea and not the whole set of several thousand of actual AMR Probank frames. But how many frames are usually needed in your practical use cases, and do you reuse those frames across projects? Well, for instance, in another project which was related to language understanding, not generation, for media monitoring, we were using FrameNet, which is kind of related to AMR. But then out of all those 1,000 FrameNet frames, it turned out that only about 10 frames are interesting and useful for this media monitoring use case typically. And then I'm wondering how many frames are typically used.
So I open ConceptNet here. So we wanted to create a package in the default open source download with the ConceptNet transformed into AMRs like has, part of, used for, is a, kind of those things expressed in AMR. And they have like about 20 relationships, and they are quite generic, but we never actually also, and the idea always was that, okay, those are generic enough and we should be able to express at least very basic things in broad variety of domains. We never actually ended up implementing it correctly, well, not correctly, but fully, because yeah, going from domain to domain, even has part of changes minutely, and you cannot really reuse very broad AMRs. Then when we were building kind of prototypes for the e-commerce, for financial sectors, it would end up with up to 10 AMRs. And again, because it's not like, it's a bit cheating in a way, saying that it's 10 abstract meaning representations, because we can make it then bigger or smaller depending on so it's not like very precise following their logic. And we would not end up using also what they provide, like what FrameNet. We also looked into FrameNet, also into what AMR has. Never actually use directly what they have. So we would always build our own bigger or larger abstract meaning representation. So, but it would never grow into like dozens of those in a domain. And to be honest, it's not like we have like, this is widely in the market. We don't have that like huge set of customers to start making conclusions. So, okay, what works, what is reusable, what's not.
Thanks. And one more question relating, can you also make nested AMRs, not in a single sentence?
Mm-hmm. Yes. So, for example, this AMR returns utterance, yes? Probably all the location. Oh, this one is sentence, but I can easily construct AMR which returns noun phrase, yes, and then I can connect it to the other AMR which accepts noun phrase. So it will connect based on types, but it will check. So what's here at the end, at the output, will be checked if I can connect. So yes, but types have to match.
Thank you.
I also wanted to express some doubts about the Blockly language, what John started basically. So did you consider some text-based language, like a traditional programming language, but somehow reduced to a readable or human readable or customer readable subset? Because I find with a graphical language, you have many issues. Like you cannot compare easily two programs in the sense of git diff or git show, which people, I think, want to do. If you have a longer program that you want to search it with a text search like grep, and traditional languages have IDEs where you can do auto completion So kind of predictive editing, where you type something and then you see what are the legal things that follow. You don't need to try to plug in every possible thing and then discover that it doesn't fit. So it's a kind of a better user interface in that sense.
Yes, agree. Yeah. Well, initially we also started working on DSL. Well, again, kind of a simplified version of building grammars. And again, I think that out of all the components, this user interface is the place where the most experimentation and change can happen. And then, yeah, it's just a matter of finding the ways to figure out what's really working. So I totally agree that DSL might be very good. Maybe changing it from Blockly. What the other idea we're trying thinking is, I forgot the name of the notation, but you know how the SQL language is not notated, and kind of you have a bubble, then it goes the connection to where, and there is this abstract notation as well. Kind of this, it's in semi-text, semi kind of a graph building. So yeah, I agree, and thanks for kind of those notes, because it adds up again to thinking where to kind of lead the user interface development, how this has to work. Maybe, for example, another approach is that since we are so data centric, we're always talking about data, so maybe data has to take a central stage in kind of the form of a graph, maybe, because if I have a fridge has a color, fridge has an engine, and an engine is a this and that power, and then construct language around my physical objects out in the world. That might be also a solution. So yeah, it's open. And then again, this Blockly was a bit, let's say, rushed idea to have it, and we are living with it for, again, pragmatic reasons, basically.
It's part of your logo already, so I was wondering how committed you are. You would have to change the logo then as well if you drop Blockly.
Whatever would work to make it true low-code, widely spread NLG platform. So yeah, whatever works, whatever would make customers happy and people happy using NLG. Okay,
one more thing. I noticed in your kind of dictionary editor, lexicon editor, you're not showing the morphological categories like past participle and plural and things, and it ends up resulting in multiple forms, like lived is there twice. It's a conscious decision that you don't want to bother the customer with what is a past participle and other such things, or
yeah, so here I would probably hide it in this place, but then if we go into the lower level editors, we would show it. So it's just let's not fully developed, because if we go into here, where was that? Where I'm creating a dictionary here, so I can add kind of the other attributes as well. But in the user interface, it's just
no, but I'm talking about the second column, the forms, where you have called and lived twice. So the customer might think, why is it twice there? How do they differ? But I assume one is, I don't know.
Oh, wait, twice, which one? Sorry. I called. Yeah. Yes, so this is like called. It's so yeah, it's not fully expressed here as it should be. So we should change it. And I would say that again, in this document plan editor, we should not have the forms listed at all. Just and then done properly with all the information, what it is in RGL level, maybe on AMR level, probably like really detailed with editing capability, because here you cannot like edit him at the moment.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Lawrence?
Yes, I'm also curious about this set of languages that you are using in practice. Well, I assume that not all the 30 plus languages are of interest for your customers. And are those 4 languages that we can see on the screen, English, German, Russian, Spanish, are what you are focusing on, or it's not a complete list? And is Lithuanian also included?
No, Lithuanian is not included because it is not in GF. And those 4 languages, again, just because we needed to do something with them, but there is nothing stopping us from adding all the languages in GF. It's just that it requires a small, well, basically to convert a few things from RGL into our own configuration file. Somewhere there is this thing. So basically we have to create a JSON configuration which says how to call RGL functions. So it's here because we needed to do it to work with them. And again, we don't have Swedish, not because it is hard to do, but we never had any need to add it here. So we add it per need basis, and it's quite simple. Yeah. But yeah, Lithuanian is not in the list of RGL languages. So, and we are not really in a position to add, but we would be happy to help, for example, adding Lithuanian and contributing back directly, of course, to the GF.
And the typical generation scenarios are to a single language or also to in a multilingual settings? Well, because you're using sometimes those static strings, and I assume
so it was static strings are here just for the demo, quick demo. We ideally you would never have them. And yes, usually it's multi-language. We are coming from small countries, so it's always English, always something else. So yeah, usually you would start with English, but then you would have additional language as well needed for the output.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, President.
Yeah, thanks for the demo. I have looked at accelerated text before, but I couldn't really get all the details only from the static information that is provided. Now it became a bit more clear what it does. And I found about accelerated text after some of you made a fork of the WordNet repository. So I was wondering if there is any idea of using it.
WordNet repository, yes. I remember, yes, we forked it for the dictionary languages, for the dictionaries in different languages. And I think it was actually for the Russian. I don't remember, it was quite a while ago, but we didn't use it. But again, I see how this could be developed and used further. We would be again looking to reuse as much as possible so that we can, because now just to make it simpler, we decided, okay, we'll create the small dictionaries on our own. But in order to support already existing big dictionaries in WordNet project, it would be very cool to kind of automatically use them. It was a bit too, I think we decided it would be a bit too much work at that time, but it would be ideal for us to actually use it directly, because again, then if we use it directly, we can contribute back directly and so on and so on. So yeah, it's going to be, NLG is such a huge kind of area that there are not enough hands to cover, and you have to cut corners very often.
Yeah, I actually talked with Roman these days about adding Russian. I have bootstrapped the dictionary, but porting the morphology would take some time, and I can't do it right now. So hopefully we'll have it at some point later.
Yes. Please.
I also did my own experiments with Blockly, but I started from the point where we parse sentences, and this is what you mentioned as future work, and I actually started from that point. Oh, many of the things that you showed, actually, I haven't even tried. So it would be nice to actually do something.
So you know what, we are now, because we have kind of more or less the code, everything, we want to just to clean it up a bit because we will make it public. So we don't want to show, you know, dirty laundry. And we will open source it, and let's connect, and then, you know, we can show you, and then, you know, because that's exactly what it is. We provide the text, it parses and creates the Blockly elements out of sample sentences.
Yeah, that's what I tried as well.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, it's 8 p.m. Thanks for the presentation and all the comments. How about we take a 5-minute break and then we start the panel discussion? And if it's okay for everyone, we could take a group photo now that we're 22 people, because the group photo last week was just 12 people. So we'll get a bigger one.
Shall we do it right now?
Yeah, we can do it right now. If you just let me actually turn on the light. If you don't want to be in the photo, just, you know, drop off and then come back in like 5 minutes. So.
There might be even more in the panel.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Oh.
But better try, make it sure now we are enough many.
I'm coming in a minute.
Okay. Yeah, okay, sorry.
We can just take a picture of Krasimir's chair.
Yeah, like we have a picture of Krasimir from last week's photo, so we can just Photoshop him in. Oh, that's you, John. I didn't recognize you without glasses.
Oh, there's such a terrible reflection on my glasses like this.
Oh, yeah, makes sense. Yeah.
It's always a problem. Yeah, I know. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Well, we can pause recording for this. Krasimir, your hand is raised. Okay. Nice.
Oops, I lowered it.
Okay. Bruno and Henry, do you want to? It's fine if you don't want to be on the pic or turn your camera. So. Okay, so put this to the other screen and then I'll take a screenshot. Oh no, of course I can't do that. Okay, so sorry. I have 2 screens, but the camera is over here, so try. We'll take a 5-minute break after this picture is taken. So, okay. So 1, 2, 3. Yes. Okay, so we'll resume 9 past. Oh, that's a cute slide.
Yes, that was very important slides for very.
Yeah. That's adorable. That's what I'm gonna do after this summer school. Like,
What, sleep and dream
Just-
for GF?
yeah. Hope I can sleep as peacefully as this cat.
So there is one cut, but where is the fun? And then the Lin.
Yeah, that's what you have in the abstract grammars. Lots of cats having fun.
Oh, this is a real good opportunity, which I joke opportunity, which I did not think of previously. So this is a Zoom question. That's okay. Can you pin certain speakers for everyone, or when I pin someone, it's just for me? You know.
I don't know. Like, I am the host, so I don't know what I can. I don't know what I can do actually. I'll try to. I mean, I can spotlight you for everyone. Like, now you spotlight.
What does spotlight? It means that it forces like the focus on you, sort of.
Yeah, I guess so.
It's not so important. Maybe it's good to not enforce this.
Yeah. Like, yeah, no, I think it's back to normal. Okay, I think we can get started. So we have 20 people. So we lost 2 people on the way, I think. Maybe they didn't want to stay after all. Okay, so let's start the final session for Thursday, and John will chair and explain everything. So go ahead.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the GF Dreams workshop. So clearly we all dream about GF all the time, but it's time to wake up, time to have a long stretch and meet other people or cats who also dream about GF and discuss your dreams with them. That's the end of my slides, by the way. No more cats, I'm afraid. The plan is that we have a panel of dreamers who are each going to talk a little bit about what their dreams for GF are. But that is only a kind of loose skeleton for the discussion. I hope that everyone kind of feels welcome to join in and participate. And what I will do is, apart from sharing, try to write down the essence of what is being discussed and have this available somewhere, just as a record, but also maybe as the basis for some kind of future roadmap and so on. So what I will start by doing is just asking each of the panelists to introduce themselves quickly, and I can prompt you individually to that. So maybe Michal, maybe you can start by just introducing yourself and explaining your dream in one sentence, maybe.
In one sentence, right? And okay. Yeah, so my name is Michal. I'm a GF addict, and I've recently started using GF for an actual real world project called CheckSlater, which I was showing yesterday. So I've been kind of writing GF application grammars for a long time, and I have a shopping list of sort of features which I wish that GF had, which have to do with kind of modeling grammatical phenomena, which sort of don't fit very neatly the definition of agreement, right? Grammatical agreement. So sometimes you see things happening in the grammatical structure of a sentence, which is difficult to model in terms of agreement. But there are other things in play, things like co-reference and the sequential ordering of words in a sentence. So I would have a shopping list of features that I wish GF had. And I can maybe show it later in a bit more detail.
Thank you. Laurette?
Am I muted? No. So hi, I was at the first summer school of GF as well as an undergraduate student in 2009, and ever since I've done all kinds of GF related projects, sometimes more a primary focus and other times just on the side. But lately, the focus has very much shifted to developing a resource grammar for Zulu. So that as a kind of a starting point for the resource grammars of South Africa. And I think, well, basically I can say my dream is that for GF and for all of us working on this is that it can contribute to the development of basically the digital presence of these under-resourced languages, but, you know, with a focus on treating the speakers of these languages with dignity. And that is what kind of this quality versus quantity trade-off that GF takes the quality route, what that can hopefully give us. So yeah, that's my dream in shortly.
Thank you. Normans, would you like to say something? See here.
Oh, sorry, am I also on the panel?
Well, you sent me a dream earlier today, so I think that qualifies you.
That was a last minute dream based on your presentation about the dynamic lexicon.
You can repeat it for everyone.
Yes, I was. Well, I really would like this possibility to make a lexicon more on the fly. I have several times came across such a need before, and this has been previously a struggle maybe to use GF in some, or to convince other people to use GF as a backbone in their projects. So yeah, this dynamic lexicon.
Thank you. Meng, do we have Meng here?
Yeah. So I think my dream would be to make GF more learnable and more accessible to people who don't have a huge background in programming and also don't have a huge background in linguistics. So I know that's a bit ambitious, but I'm thinking of other books that are out there. Like, for example, there's the book on computational semantics with functional programming, right? I'm looking at Amazon. There's a book that says practical object-oriented design with Ruby. There's a course that you can take called Machine Learning with Python. So we have here a grammar where there's the subject, and then it's with this technology that you learn it with. And I was thinking maybe there could be a computational linguistics with GF, where it introduces linguistics to people who, don't exactly know anything beyond adjectives and adverbs. And it also introduces GF at the same time.
Thank you. We also have one dreamer in absentia. So Hans Leis, who is a long-time GFer, wrote in, but he was unable to join the meeting today. But essentially, he expressed his dream as being better quality control for the RGL. So how do we, first of all, as a user, how does one know that a resource grammar is of a certain quality, first of all? There are some test suites around, but they're not maybe standardized across the different languages. The fact that they are different languages makes it a bit harder to standardize, etc. Maybe I can read his full thing a bit later. And then we have Krasimir.
Yes, I already mentioned my dream in one of my talks. I would like to have the development of application grammars easier. It's totally worth it to spend a lot of time on a resource grammar because it's a very reusable thing. But then I think it still takes too much effort to build an application grammar. And well, there are a lot of things that we can do, and it's a lot of unsolved problems. What we saw today with accelerated text is one example how to make things easier. I also made my own experiments, and I also, for example, the WordNet is one step in that direction. Then there are other things like dynamic grammar updates and supporting bigger grammars and better parsing and this kind of things.
Thank you. And Arne, finally.
Yes, so I actually made a couple of slides, but I can show them later. So it's it's all developing this dream that I always had, that the mission of GF is to formalize the grammars of the world and make them available for computer applications. So I thought about some consequences from this dream. So I will show them at that.
Why don't you show them now, I think, because you're the last panelist I was going to mention. So it's
okay, thanks for giving me the last word. Well, not the last word, but yeah. So it's here. Okay, so then can you see it now?
Yes.
Yes.
So the grammars of the world. So we have kind of 40 resource grammars, and the next step that is wanted in abstract Wikipedia is 300. And then there are 6,000 in the world, at least at the moment, or maybe a bit more. And this is a dream that will never be quite fulfilled, but I think we can, the only way to fulfill it is to expand the community anyway. So, but that's, I think this is a relevant dream for us. Then also that we want to cover these grammars a bit better. Like we have the RGL core, which is hard to extend very much because it's hard to maintain the extensions for all the languages, but we want to kind of maybe have extensions that are at different pace for each language, but which cover the grammar eventually better than what is done now. And then comprehensive dictionaries, so that we also cover the words of the languages, both I think as a morphological unilingual descriptions and the multilingual semantic descriptions, okay, like the WordNet, of course. Formalize, so even if we have these grammars, so I think there is a bit problems with the quality from time to time, and I think we need to have a more rigorous testing and other quality control for the resource grammars. Of course, it's done by, let's say, in the agile way, so that we let, whenever there is a bug that happens in some application or somewhere, so then we fix it when someone has time and energy to do it. But I think we might be more systematic about this, using testing methods and tree banks and so on. Make them available. So high-level APIs, I still think that this is, at least for me, this is the most natural way to address the, for instance, the application grammar difficulties for programmers. But then, of course, there are other, so some people enjoy programming and they don't want to avoid it, but they want to program on a high level and not repeat themselves. So that's what we want. But the development tools also for less skilled or less like initiated people, like some of the ones that we have seen during the summer school, very promising. And then on another dimension, a more scalable compilation and runtime, so that we can actually build vastly multilingual grammars, and we can build vastly for big grammars. And I think one part here is also, yeah, so this has to do, for instance, with the grammar as the database idea that Krasimir presented, and then also what we do when we only need to linearize and we don't need to have a parsing grammar. So that's, I think, a promising idea as well. Then computer applications. So I would love to see useful and widely used end user applications that kind of everyone knows. I don't think there is any such application, or maybe there is, but it hides GF so well that we don't know it. That would be great to find out. But so GF doesn't need to be visible, but if we know that it is somewhere there, so it would be a great pleasure for those of us who have contributed this. Abstract Wikipedia, I think, is now a very promising such thing. So that I would like to yeah, really work on, and not only me, but as many as possible to contribute to it. Language learning applications is another candidate. And then if all of this might be, or some of this at least might be open source and free software. So I think GF should also, it would be great if we could create more business and work opportunities, more startup companies and maybe bigger companies also adapting GF. So we have digital grammars, as you know, but I don't think digital grammars has ever tried to monopolize GF in any way. It's rather than we are trying to show an example of how one can make some business with GF. So this is the summary of that, and then the last slide. So I feel belonging to the grandparent generation now, at least in two ways. So one way is that I have a grandchild who is now 6 years. The other thing is that I have a PhD of my PhD student. So Herbert is the student and the first one. And so I feel that I should somehow leave the stage to other people. So I'm really happy to give up the overall control of GF, and I have to some extent already done it, so I don't really mess up with the GF core code anymore. It's other people who do it. And I actually find out that I enjoy donkey work on concrete projects. So in some sense, I started to develop GF to be able to write grammars myself, and then other people have also started to write grammars. So it's ultimately the enjoyment and fun that I get there. So even if I really appreciate that others are taking control, so I would really love to maintain backward compatibility in the sense that if someone has done something in GF, so their code will not break when the next release comes. Of course, within some limits, so we can talk about those later, but we have promised something to the developers. For instance, if they use the RGL API, so then it will not break. Also discourage forking and duplicate work. I know that this is very difficult because people work from their own agendas and they will only see later that their work has actually overlapped quite a lot. But events like this at least keep us connected and see what others are doing. And then help the community grow and build bridges. So a part of the agenda with the two talks I gave here this week was to build bridges first to the Wikimedia community and then to the UD community. And I think we can, of course, all contribute to this as well. So yeah, that was my dreams. Some come true already, and some will never be complete.
Let me pick up on this thing you mentioned about ensuring better quality, because it links to what Hans has sent into. So I'll read it out for you now. The dream of Hans Slice in absentia, which is how to define, ensure, maintain, and improve resource grammar correctness. The abstract grammar of the RGL gives some idea about the intended coverage, but I think better developed tree banks are needed, divided according to phrase categories and nesting depth of construction, so that the subgrammar of a particular category can be tested before testing the combination. Files of natural language example phrases are needed, with an indication which ones can already be parsed, which ones yet cannot, which one should not be possible, to provide a basis for regression testing. One can build such tree banks for test files, but a major problem is that generally there are too many parse trees for a given input, which makes it hard to see a specific intended tree is among the trees found by the parser, or if a wrong tree intended to be avoided by the corrected grammar is among the trees. Something like files with example phrases annotated by trees seem to be needed, not just files of example phrases. And of course, a number of tools that could help build up some files, such files, or use them in comparing modified grammars with previous versions would be part of the stream. So yes, he's very much talking about this idea for tree banks and quality sort of control in the RGL. And I think we would all agree that this is kind of something that is good for software development in general, but also for the kind of reputation, I think, and the image of any software project. You know, if you're just discovering it and you're trying to decide whether it's worth investing time in and so on, these kind of things can play quite a big role, I think. Maybe I will open up for anyone to answer is what do we think about the current state of this thing in GF, and what we could do to make it better, why it isn't better than it already is. Like that. Does anyone want to comment on this?
I will just say that I think the testing is actually really hard. We found it quite hard because you have to balance the overgeneration and spurious parse trees. So I think it's just a very hard problem, and often I find it useful to test given a certain use case. So you test something, you build some kind of grammar or base it on the resource grammar, whatever. And then given what you will be using it for, you design some kind of test to make sure that it'll be useful for that. But the RGL, the intent is that it has many uses. And so maybe that's why testing hasn't really been something that's done, because it's difficult to, I don't know, focus your efforts.
There was some discussion, I think, started by Peter Lundglöf a while ago about such a format for tree banks, I guess. Does anyone remember that in more detail than I do?
Yes, there is a Python script that does it. I was just actually looking at I have those for 5 languages that I have, at least that many, but I can paste some examples in the chat.
So would it be fair to say that something does exist, but we just haven't been good at enforcing it or promoting it? Or...
Yeah, exactly. I think that's the... Let me just paste you.
Oh. There are some example phrases way back ago when I worked on Bulgarian about 2008, and even then there was a set of examples. And then the question is, the problem first is that these examples, they're not enough when you work on another language and you new feature.
Is Krasimir cutting out for everybody or just me?
Cutting for me too.
I have the same problem, yeah. I first thought it was me, but...
Okay, it seems to have dropped out completely now. No, Krasimir, we can't hear you at all, so we just have to wait until maybe it gets back. Just
So I could say at the meantime that Inari's GF test tool has a very promising way of finding language-specific test cases. But I'm not sure how widely it is used and what else would be needed to make it,
Yeah, I think it's very slow for any language of any complexity. I mainly use it if I want to do like exhaustive thing. I use it for application grammars, and then the way I mostly use it with resource grammars is if I work on one function and then I create output test cases for that one function, and then finally if I change something I do the difference. But like for like actually like generating a full set of test cases for a full resource grammar, that's like just not happening. It's like, I guess Lauret has tried.
I've tried, and we've had some success with it, but as soon as the grammar becomes quite large, then especially if you're still in development, and this is specifically a resource grammar, then asking your informant, even if the informant is, so we take your GF test output and we make a nice little document that has the parse tree and the linearization next to each other. because since we are also fiddling with the abstract syntax, we sometimes want to know if the tree is maybe the problem in a sense. But what I would like, if I have a dream for GF test, it would be that there's some ways of having a very light layer of semantics over the resource grammar so that you can steer things a little bit, but not too much. I don't know if that's even possible. So that the examples that you show to someone who has to say if that's correct or not does check as much as possible, but also doesn't say things that are just so semantically implausible that you can't almost think about the syntax of it, you know. So that's been a challenge. We've basically reverted to a handcrafted tree bank of examples that we try to maintain and give examples, and we have a little protocol. It's not ideal and it's definitely not as nice. So what the GF test does is it creates these random, relatively, I think it's random, but so it tests things that you don't think of testing necessarily, and that's good. But then on the other hand, that can add a lot of complexity in the communication with the informant. So, yeah.
So Lorette, is your position often that you are writing resource grammars in conjunction with language informants, or do you have maybe students or a group of people who are writing the resource grammars under your guidance?
No, that's my 10-year plan. Now, at the moment, there's not a lot of activity, but what I can say about the Zulu resource grammar is that we have found that you need maybe just, I don't know, we need a very good linguist. It's not just a mother tongue informer that can say if something is right or wrong, because often they don't necessarily have enough background in the linguistics of their language. So we have a linguist who's a retired professor who is our informant, both on the linearization, and he can at least look at the trees and give some feedback on that. So, but yeah, we hope to grow the community, but at the moment it's a very small set of people working on this.
Because my side question, and we'll come to Arne after this, is we're going to be how important do you think it would be for there to be more standardized maybe tools or resources for people who are building resource grammars in the form of like a standardized tree bank or some other tool, these kind of things?
Yeah, very much. I think yes, that would have been very helpful. Even so, yeah, I don't have very good concrete thoughts about what that would look like, but in the same way as that the abstract syntax helps you conceptualize of the project a bit and what needs to be done and what has to be kind of covered. Some more tools that basically answer the question, what do I have to do to finalize all of this, would be quite useful, I think. Yeah.
Arne?
So here is one thought which has to do with this avoidance of duplicate work. So we could start with a kind of abstract RGL tree bank and something that we have, and then build up one tree bank. And then whenever someone has new test cases for a new language, they add it there. And then we might also tag those test cases with the languages for which they are considered relevant or irrelevant, so that this would grow constantly. And then people would, of course, be able to take subsets from that. And that's something that I think the tree banks have so far usually been made in very many different projects and not in such a concentrated community effort. So some kind of a good platform for this, maybe GitHub is enough. I'm not quite sure.
Yep. And I can imagine that for languages that even don't have any tree banks, that would be a good start for a first tree bank.
Shall we go from here to Meng, who wrote this idea of education, so teaching people helping people get into GF. You mentioned the idea of books, but I know, Meg, that you have kind of a lot of experience of other projects. And what do you see that kind of is missing from GF, which makes it easy for people to get into it? I mean, my implication here is that some more standardized workflows for testing and so on would be a starting point.
Yeah, I guess if I can give a bit of background on the motivation and the requirements for this dream, it's, I've got a small team of people here. Inari has been working with them very closely, but the general pattern is that we hire somebody new who is often a sort of self-taught programmer or somebody who's been through a boot camp, but they haven't necessarily been through a full degree in computer science. They haven't had any kind of formal training in linguistics. And we're trying to get them to become a competent application grammar developer as part of the larger application context. And it would be really nice if we could onboard somebody like that with some kind of course of instruction that takes them from zero to hero, like knowing how to do all this stuff. And reading the textbook is just part of it, I think, because I know that my difficulty when I was reading the textbook was that it assumed that I knew a little bit more linguistics than I actually knew. Now, maybe that's just my personal limitation, but it would have been nice to have an introduction to linguistics at the same time as an introduction to GF. And I think if some sort of resource were available that did that, it could be a book, it could be a bunch of blog posts, it could be a really beefed up documentation, part of the website, it could be a course, a video course. If something like that existed, we could take a promising undergrad or just a promising self-taught and say, go learn all of this stuff and come back in 6 months, or come back when you've absorbed all of it, and you'll be in a much better position to write the application and write the application grammar.
Wow. So my perspective is that there is quite a lot of stuff that has been written over the years. And part of the problem is that sometimes there's an overlap and other times there's gaps. And then some things are outdated and other really vital things are maybe in one of Inari's blog posts or maybe in some random discussion. So there isn't a single up-to-date source for all the valuable things, I think. And this is obviously no one's fault, just a kind of side effect of the way that these things have grown over the years. And I think it's kind of hard to find people to put the work into compiling it again. Inari, you have a lot of you've been very active in this kind of GF evangelization, education role. What's your view on this?
Yeah, I write what I find fun. So I write tons about morphosyntax and not about I also about practical stuff, but yeah. But
you're often the person to kind of respond to people's questions on a mailing list and on Stack Overflow, for example. So
yeah, exactly. But that's easy. If I'm prompted, that's super easy. So it's one simple question, then it's a limited scope. So.
And what about what you've seen over the past? Your time in Singapore, but also the summer school in particular, is the kind of obvious gaps in documentation or other resources for people, or
yeah. So I think just how to use the RGL. Like Regina said a comment on the chat. This is as a semi-novice, it's fine. It's challenging to know that now my concrete needs extend eng. How we have the RGL synopsis, but it's. I don't remember anymore how it is to not know GF or RGL. So yeah, I don't know. Maybe someone actual newbie, or maybe some of my colleagues would like to talk more concretely. How do they feel this?
Maybe I can say a little bit because I've been a teaching assistant in the Anna's GF course, and yes, it's a challenge to show the people how to get started. that's one of the big challenges. And like Inari mentioned, sometimes it's difficult to remember what challenges one had themselves in the beginning. And but one problem is, I think there is so much material around. So there is course material and books and blog posts and so on. So probably most of the information is already there. It's just not easy to find.
Ariana, is that something?
I wanted to add, well, I've been a student in the course where Herbert was TA. And I'm going to say, like, of course, it's challenging to show people how to get started. And I think one of the problems is, of course, that it's hard to remember what were the challenges that you faced. So maybe it should be someone who's newer to all this to write the most basic learning resources. So that's just a random thought. But then another thing, I think it should be really taken into account that some people who learn GF, they have a background in functional programming, some others have a background in linguistics, and they have very different difficulties. So like, for example, in the course at GU, most people have a background in linguistics, and generally they understand most of the concepts very easily, but maybe they just have very basic, they have difficulties with very basic things like understanding the syntax, just because they've never seen anything similar to that. So I think that the fact that there are two different like target groups when you write some tutorial or, I don't know, film a video or give a class, this is something that should really be taken into account, because different people come from different places, very different places.
What we think about what it takes to produce such resources. You know, there's the book, of course, and the documentation on the website is, in some sense, close to that. And then there's, for example, Inari's blog posts, which are done sort of out of for fun. I don't know how would you describe that, Inari. But is it reasonable to think that we could sort of find the resources somehow to put into this, into updating the documentation? I mean, I think the truth is people often find that writing documentation is kind of not as fun as writing code.
No, it's equally fun. I think.
So are you volunteering, Ariana?
Why not? Just I need time to know more before I teach other people.
So my experience is it's nice to write documentation when you have a clear audience, or actually to write anything. It's always good to have in mind some people whom you want to write to. And then you can focus on what you can assume them knowing. And yeah, that has at least been useful for me. So Herbert mentioned this course that with the computational syntax, and then of course it was a bit higher level of starting point because they already had basic courses in computational linguistics, but certainly meaningful to start from that level, to know where you start from. I have also noticed that when it comes to the knowledge of linguistics that Meng mentioned, so I think different countries are education is a bit different in different countries. That in some countries the schools teach much more grammar than in some other countries, and that is a challenge.
I want to also point some more things on the chat. So like Mariam said that like if she has a problem with Haskell, you can look it up on Stack Overflow or someone else's code on GitHub. So I definitely disagree with Herb saying that there is too much documentation. It's like, because it's not just the documentation, like it's just the more popular the language is, the more resources, like implicit resources that are not an official official book or anything, just resource by example. Someone else did the same thing. You can copy them.
I agree with that. Sorry, it seems to me, I was thinking about people used to do wikis. I don't know if they still do wikis, but I feel like 80% of the wikis I ever clicked on hadn't been edited in the last 3.5 years. And so if you try to centralize this, maybe that does often happen, is it is too cumbersome a project to keep together, and it kind of peters out a bit. Whereas if you have this distributed model, it has a bit more, it's more flexible maybe.
So maybe we should contribute more to Wikipedia itself. Like, I think there are many articles that I have seen, for instance, on NLG, where there is nothing about GF and things like that. So that, because that would address people who come from different perspectives. One dream that I sometimes had was that actually when you have a Wikipedia article about the grammar of some language, so then there would actually be something which relates to the GF and maybe some, yeah, but maybe that's to go a bit too far, but imagine, because that's a kind of wiki which is certainly updated and read by people, I would say.
That's a great idea, Arna. I think I'm going to try and do that for the Zulu. I think that would be useful.
It sounds to me that there's a place for official documentation, but there's also a place for just solutions to things which are kind of outside the official thing, such as Stack Overflow discussions or whatever. And
yes,
as Inari said, the bigger language is, the bigger the community is, and the more discussions there are, so the more likely you are to find someone who's had the same problem as you. And I think it was Lorette who put it in this way, that it's a kind of distributed way of approaching the problem. So we're not trying to find resources to give to someone to write a new GF book, but maybe the focus should be on just increasing, growing the community, which has all the other benefits, but a side effect will be that it will be easier for other people to find help, perhaps. Herbert, are you waiting to ask something or say something?
Yeah, so maybe a little bit to clarify. So one challenge is actually to organize the information, and maybe having a more central place would solve some of the problems. So there was this discussion that it's confusing about what files are necessary for GF grammar, and this, there is the library synopsis, but it's sometimes not helpful. But I, for example, wrote for my students a short introduction how to get started with a GF grammar. But that, of course, was only on the course internal course page and not on some kind of official wiki. On the other hand, it's already confusing for the people to find the right information. So I had recently a case where someone was looking for information and asking questions about stuff in the official tutorial, and the answers would have been in the reference document. But in this situation, the person was not coming up with the idea of looking in this document, which is linked in the same place, basically. So making information accessible that is there is, I think, one of the biggest challenges. And I don't know, maybe writing a full new book would actually be one central place, but of course it's also the biggest effort. But if someone feels like writing books, I think it would be a good idea.
Inari?
Yeah, so just on writing a new book, like it should not be just GF book number 2, but it should be just like Meng says, like doing practical thing with a technology. So that book should contain like an example or repository that you can just clone and then do it. And like it should be, if there will be a book, it should be like not just a repetition of the same, but something.
So we're using the word book a lot, but
yeah,
should we think something a bit more modern than a book?
Yeah, exactly.
Does
like
someone have
GitHub.io with a repository that you can clone and like.
Right. Does someone have a good example of a kind of modern way of teaching a language or a framework, which is, I mean, I guess web-based? Maybe someone will mention Jupyter at this point, even though I have my reservations. Anyone have some thoughts there?
I would still claim that the book is a good idea because it's, yeah, so if you read it from the beginning to the end, and it is kind of simple and enough, it's not a kind of a manual, but it's really a tutorial, and it's coherent and consistent. I sometimes feel tempted to write yet another book for instance, of the kind that Meng mentioned. But then I think also that someone else should write that book because my perspective is too biased. It's
Ariana.
So I agree that a book is really good to have, especially if it's like the Jewish book, which is quite concise and you read it from beginning to end. But then that's I think super useful and never sufficient because it has to be concise. Otherwise you don't read it from beginning to end. Then I think the point is, I mean, usually when I learn a programming language, I'm really happy if the documentation is it's not super synthetic. It actually explains a little bit how things work and gives examples and so on. And maybe there are also some tutorials that are more like step by step how to do a particular thing. So still text resources, but in a more like maybe a bit closer to blog posts, but more systematic would be useful to add to a book. Like, I think there are two different things and they have two different purposes. Also, like, I had recorded some videos that many of my classmates and I appreciated a lot. And there is something, so the same problem as with the blog posts. Like, they're excellent, but they don't cover enough, obviously, because they're made like sporadically, like, for fun, as in essence. But I'm not a fan of video for learning programming because you can never like Control F or copy paste from video. That's just a very practical.
Yeah, so Norman.
My experience is.
Go ahead, Krasimir, and then we take Norman's afterwards.
My experience is that many students just don't read books, and if there is something on YouTube or on a website, then this is first priority because it's searchable. And for some reason, YouTube or any kinds of movies are more popular than reading books, at least with the later generation.
Yeah, but it can still be that you can reach the serious beginners with books.
It's not like people who watch programming videos on YouTube are not serious. It's just that sometimes you're serious, but then the video is just a video. And I mean, if it is a video, then it should have also some text associated to it that you can use as reference after you watch the video. Sometimes it's easier to learn from a video, actually, I think. Because you see the other person doing what they're supposed to do. And you're like, yeah, then this is actually possible. I can see it step by step, and it works. Yeah. So initially, you can just copy, and then you learn.
And there is also already one book. Why not having something else instead? And it could be also something incremental, built by many people together, piece by piece.
Norman's.
Yeah, I have two comments on this. First of all, I think both books, videos, and other media are necessary. And one thing could be a series of YouTube videos. But then the videos, of course, shouldn't contain too much detail so that they are up to date for a longer time. It's much more difficult to make and edit nice videos. and of course a complementary book is required, or any other more precise resource. But the other comment and my initial comment was on the target groups. Currently, maybe the book is for both application developers and resource grammar developers, and maybe there is too little information for the resource grammar developers. Well, I haven't skimmed the book for a longer time, but I feel the need that maybe, for instance, the Latvian resource grammar should be completely rewritten or refactored. And I would like to consider and take into account the best practice from other languages specifically for this function or for this module, and what is actually common in for what is commonalities among languages or some specifics, and what should I consider to make Latvian grammar in this case optimal, and so on.
So, let me ask you a planning question, which is how long was this planned to be? Because initially I saw 90 minutes and now I see that it's 20.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't really, I don't know. I just I think it was actually Laurette made this calendar originally, then I just put some, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm free all night, so.
My original thought was that we go till past, so another 30 minutes, but maybe we can overshoot if there's need to. Let us transition a little bit into some other dreams which we haven't come to. Maybe I will give the floor to Michal now, who started talking about the idea of new features basically inside of the GF language. Would you elaborate a little bit?
Okay, well, my dreams are a little bit more down to earth or closer to the skin. What I would like to see, what I would love to see in GF is to be able to model certain things that are difficult to be able to model easily certain things that are difficult to model in GF. I would like GF to be more kind of I would like the grammars which I write in GF to be more kind of descriptionally adequate. By that I mean to reflect more closely the concepts and phenomena that are usually evoked in grammar books to explain things, right? So grammar books often bring in the concept of agreement and dependency to explain things, how things work in a language. And GF is great at modeling this, right? GF is great at modeling agreement. But then there are other things that, other kinds of concepts and phenomena that grammar books often sort of use to explain how a language works, and GF is not so great at modeling them. And I mean, in particular, I mean two things. One of them is co-reference, when two nodes in your syntax tree refer to one thing, to one entity in the real world, or to one sort of concept. And that fact is somehow relevant for linearization, right? So this sort of thing is difficult to model in GF. And then the other thing which is difficult to model in GF is the linear sequencing of words in a sentence. Sometimes the mere fact that two words sit next to each other in a sentence is important for how you linearize these words. And trying to model this pretending that this is agreement is sometimes a bit awkward, right? Because really it isn't agreement really, or not only agreement, but also the fact that these words just happen to sit next to each other. So maybe,
sorry, forgive me, but so concretely, a very simple example of this is the A sort of a determiner in English, right? Sometimes you have to make it AN because there's a vowel in the following word, yes. And maybe there's a specific construct in GF for this, which is the pre-construct, but it's not very general.
Exactly, yeah. So I have one or two examples from other languages which I can show you now. So I'll just share my screen, yeah, and show you some, Yeah, so one question that often kind of lands on my desk as a problem to solve in GF is the phenomenon of preposition vocalization in Slavic languages, particularly in Czech, right? So this is something that, I mean, basically every preposition in Czech has two shapes, a non-vocalized one and a vocalized one. And which one you need to use, that depends on the identity of the word that follows. It's not completely regular. You can't predict it from the spelling. You can't always predict it from the pronunciation of the words. It's just an arbitrary property of the word that follows the preposition, which says, if I have the preposition V before me, then you need to vocalize this preposition, right? And nouns have this property, adjectives have this property, also possessive pronouns have this property, numbers have this property. Basically, any word that can come after a preposition has the property that says, if there is a preposition before me, and if the preposition is this particular preposition, then you need to vocalize this preposition, right? And this is very difficult to handle in GF by pretending that it's agreement. So here is what like a very simplified grammar of a very small language would look like, where you have just two nouns, two adjectives, and one preposition. And you want to combine them into these phrases where you have phrases like in the large school or in the small bank, right? And so typically you would have lines like this. So for every noun and for every adjective, you would have a property that says that the preposition, if I have a preposition in front of me, then please vocalize this preposition or don't, right? So every noun has this, every adjective has this. And then when you're kind of putting them together, you need to know that you're going to have this particular word before this preposition, and depending on whether the word requires vocalization or not, you sort of insert the correct form of the preposition there. I mean, okay, so this is kind of, we've just pretended that this is sort of grammatical agreement, like we're passing gender and number and things like that up and down the tree, right? But and this is a pretty trivial example, but if you have a more complicated grammar where you need to juggle lots of grammatical cases and adjectives that differ in whether they should go to the front or to the back, and then additionally you have to worry about vocalization, which is a completely different kind of axis of variation, right? So the grammar becomes kind of difficult to handle. So it would be much more easier for me anyway, this is just my subjective opinion, if GF had some extra syntax that allowed me to sort of specify that this token should be like this if it is followed by a token that has the following property, and it should be like this if it is followed by a token that doesn't have this property, right? So I imagine that, I mean, this is just fake syntax. You can't do this in GF, right? This doesn't compile. But I imagine that you could say that the fact that a preposition before, if this word has a preposition before itself, that the preposition needs to be vocalized, I would imagine that this would be a property of the string, not of this particular grammatical object. And then the preposition itself would be linearized as something that says, if the word before me, if the word after me requires that I should be vocalized, then I should be vocalized, and if not, then not, right? And then just putting prepositions in front of everything is just ordinary concatenation, right? I know that this syntax doesn't exist in GF, but if something like this existed in GF in the programming language, then I would find that the grammars written by me would be more kind of descriptionally adequate to how I understand the grammar of the language works, because I think that preposition vocalization in Slavic languages and also initial consonant mutation in Celtic languages are phenomena which are triggered by the linear ordering of words in a sentence, regardless of agreement and dependency, or in addition to agreement and dependency, right? So I'm unhappy about the fact that I need to pretend all the time that these things are grammatical agreement. I would like GF to give me sort of the expressivity to express that these things are triggered by linear agreement. So this linear arrangement, right? So this would be one of my dreams. Having syntax like this in GF would probably break bidirectionality, right? You probably could use it for generation. Sorry, Krasimir?
It won't break. It actually is not very hard to make it.
Well, I'm glad to hear that.
it takes time to do it, but it's not in principle difficult.
Right.
I think Lorette has a comment.
Let me maybe.
Sorry, go ahead.
We can maybe debate this in a bit more detail later, but I would like to go to my second example, which is sort of related, but not completely. But maybe, yeah, I would like to just finish my kind of line of argumentation here before we debate the individual cases. So my second kind of item on my wish list is that I would like to be able to model the phenomenon of co-reference in GF, where you have things inside your abstract syntax tree and some of the nodes kind of refer to the same thing, right? So here is an example application grammar for saying things like he has lost his phone, right? And I would like to be able to express the fact that, so when I create an abstract syntax tree in this grammar, one like this, so lost he, and so he has lost something, and what has he lost? He has lost a phone that belongs to he, right? So I would like to be able to express the fact that these two he's either do or do not co-refer to the same entity, right? So again, this is fake syntax, which you can't do in GF, but it would be wonderful if I could somehow indicate that the two he's either do co-refer or don't, right? And then a concrete grammar could use this information to linearize the individual functions differently depending on whether they co-refer to something and what they co-refer to and so on. Now, this would be relevant, this would be very helpful when I'm writing grammars of Czech and also other Slavic languages, and also a number of other European languages where you have this phenomenon called the reflexivization of possessive, or the reflexivization of pronouns, right? So when you have a sentence like he lost his phone, there are two possible translations into many languages, including Czech, depending on whether the two pronouns co-refer or don't, right? So if they don't co-refer, then you just use the ordinary possessive pronoun from the third person singular pronoun he, his, and so on. And if they do co-refer, then instead you need to use the reflexive pronoun, which is basically like self, right? So he lost self's phone, right? So you have this phenomenon in Czech where if you have a pronoun somewhere in your sentence which co-refers with the subject, then that pronoun needs to be reflexive, right? This is grammar. This is not just a question of stylistics. It would be wrong not to do it, right? So I would love to be able to encode these facts in abstract syntax trees and then use them in the concrete grammar to linearize sentences depending on whether this thing co-refers to the subject or not. So for that, I need to know whether things co-refer, and then also I need to know what the subject of the sentence is. So this is what a concrete grammar would typically look like to generate sentences like this. And of course, it's wrong because it doesn't take account of the fact that you need to reflexivize a pronoun if it co-refers with the subject. So this generates slightly incorrect sentences. For example, it only generates he lost his phone in the sense that he lost someone else's phone, right? But it doesn't reflexivize correctly the pronoun. So I would love to be able to do something like this. I would like to, so in the grammar, I can have two pronouns, like the third person he, and then a reflexive pronoun, right? And then when I'm linearizing the noun phrase, his phone, then I would like to say, okay, if something is true, if something is the case, then use the reflexive pronoun, and if not, then just use the ordinary third person pronoun. Now, what is this? What should I have here? Okay, so what I would like to do in GF is to be able to say that when I'm linearizing the whole sentence, it would have a property which tells me who is the subject, right? So here I linearize the whole sentence and I say that this person is the subject. And then further down in the concrete syntax tree, this function says, okay, if, okay, this again is fake syntax, which doesn't exist in GF. It says, if the person co-refers with the subject property of the closest ancestor of type S, then use the reflexive pronoun. And if not, then use just the ordinary pronoun. I know this can't be done in GF, and you can work around it. You can fake it by sort of passing features around up and down the tree and pretending that this is agreement. But that seems like kind of a workaround to me, and I don't like doing that because it's just there's too many features to pass around everywhere. You know, these pronouns that may or may not co-refer with the subject, and on account of that may or may not need to be reflexivized. They can be anywhere in the sentence, right? So it's very difficult to just keep track of what the subject is and whether something co-refers to it or not. So I know this is impossible in GF. And again, maybe if we had something like this in GF, maybe it would break bidirectionality. But if we did have it, then I would be able to write grammars which, in my opinion, are more descriptionally adequate. Okay, descriptional adequacy is not only about the fact that the grammar is able to generate correct sentences, but also about the fact that the way the grammar is structured and written sort of reflects the mental categories that you have in your mind when you're thinking about how the language works. So the fact that we're unable to model co-reference and linear sequencing of things is, for me, is sometimes quite inconvenient. And my dream would be to have a grammar formalism that allows me to do these things. So please, somebody tell me that this is not a problem and that we can have this.
So
That's
before
a problem.
there are any answers, Michal, thank you for this really well thought out example. Can you share it by adding it to the repository?
Yeah, okay, I'll do it right after this, sure.
Or as a note for later, yes, comments.
Most of it is not actual, that's just fake code, which doesn't...
No, but it illustrates the point that you want to make, so we should save it.
Yes, I'll share it. I'll put it in the summer school repository straight after this. Yeah.
Thank you. Comments to Michal?
Yeah, so I mean, the problem that you are describing is, of course, a real problem, and it's also the same thing happens in Swedish, exactly the same way as in Czech, and therefore there is this, and also in Finnish actually, and. In the extend module, so there is this reflexive phrase, which is a generalization of a reflexive pronoun, and I think that will at least solve the problems that you mentioned. Maybe not in the kind of mindset that you want to have it, but at least it is there. So for the descriptive or the grammatical correctness point of view, it has been solved.
Yeah, I've heard about it. I've heard that there is some way of solving it, but I mean, and I haven't looked at it in much detail, but I'm pretty certain that you're solving it by pretending it's agreement. And well, I mean, it is agreement, but it's not the kind of agreement. I mean, things agree with each other in the sense that the subject and some other pronoun somewhere else agree with each other, but they're not connected.
Yeah, no, I think I would see reflexivization more like an agreement, but there is another case for co-reference, which is when you have, for instance, intersentential anaphora, and this is something that you can solve by using dependent types and the variable bindings, but those are not very well supported by all of GF, but that's the kind of the. So I think what you are doing here, so it might come out as a special case of using the variable bindings, but I can't be quite sure about that.
Well, I mean, even the fact that we have to think really hard to find some way of solving this problem is suspicious, you know. I mean, ideally, I'm not, you know, I mean, I'm describing 99% of the expressivity of GF is perfectly appropriate for what I need. But these things are, in my opinion, not, right? And if we have to think really, really hard how to model co-reference, then that's not great. I mean, there should be some sort of a really relatively easy to use kind of feature in the programming language to say that these things co-refer, and then to be able to access that information somewhere else.
But
That's
the language is, yeah.
functionally adequate solution.
So the design problem is whether you do it by extending the language or by providing inside the language a library API that solves a problem so that you don't need to care about it. So this is a deep question, I acknowledge, but it's yeah.
Well, I was asked to share dreams, so this is one of my wilder dreams.
I actually use this RNP category in the WordNet corpus, and it's really inconvenient to use, and it means that we have to duplicate a lot of rules that are in NP. We should also make a version for RNP. And the rules that we have now, they don't even cover all possible situations. And so I have been thinking in the same lines as Michał, but in a slightly different way. I would like to have some kind of API for expressing anaphora, how to compute exactly the anaphora, and then use that. And it looks like variable bindings, but it's not exactly the same. The variable bindings don't let you to propagate grammatical features. You really need an extension for that. So this is about the anaphora. The other thing with the V pronoun, we actually have exactly the same thing in Bulgarian, but then the form of the preposition depends just on the first letter of the next word. It's V or VOF, and then it's the same thing. But I guess it's not exactly the same in Czech, or is it?
No, in Czech it's a lot less regular.
Okay.
It's basically an arbitrary. Well, I mean, you can argue whether there is some sort of regularity behind the irregularity, but the usual treatment of this in grammar books is that it's just an arbitrary property of the word that follows the preposition. So the default is don't vocalize, but then a fairly high number of words have this property that says, oh, please vocalize this preposition if it's before me. It's not regular.
But anyway, something can be done, I think. By the way, I was enjoying reading your Czech examples. I can read most of them without looking at English. Yes. That was nice.
Slavic languages, woo!
Yeah. I think this is something to think about, and I still keep thinking about the anaphora thing. I really want to have something like this in the WordNet corpus.
Well,
but it requires extensions to the language, as you guessed properly.
Good. It's good that we have a Slavic speaker on the top floor. That makes it easier to drive this agenda. So. Okay, I'll stop sharing that now, I suppose.
Thank you, Michał. Laurette has something to say, I think.
So I have a question about the impact. So at the moment, I'm very worried about the efficiency of the grammar. And so in the Afrikaans, we used to, the final negative particle depends on a few things, but basically it comes down to a sound issue. Like you can't have two of them next to each other, even if compositionally you would have had two. So I used eventually, at first I tried the parameter route, and that was not a very pretty grammar. And then I used pre to solve this. So it's not, it doesn't depend on a parameter, it just depends on the string. And it seemed like the grammar was less, it was smaller. So I had some kind of gain, but as I said earlier to Inari, PMCFG is still a bit magical to me. So I would be interested in knowing if this is implemented, what effect would it have on grammars, and because we're doing a lot of the same thing with parameters at the moment, aligning the morphemes based on fake properties. And if this is done, will we have some could it be a gain of some kind in the complexity of the PMCFG?
That would be a question for Krasimir, I suppose, no?
Oh, if you have inherent features with a lot of parameters, then yes, it will have a large impact. But
then I will also
I think what we need is a parameter, well, something that is not a string, but a type of string and parameter. And then have a way to query the parameters of the next words.
Exactly.
That will help, I think, for us as well.
The runtime already deals with two kinds of objects during the linearization, a plain word and a pre-thing. And then there should be a third thing, which is a word post parameter. Then at parsing time, you just ignore these parameters. And then at linearization time, you can query it.
So at parsing time, you would treat it as variation, yes?
Yes, that's the easiest thing. And this is what I do for pre. What we need actually is a pre which doesn't pattern much on the string, but on the parameter.
Right.
Yeah, something like that. So can we have that tomorrow, please?
No, unless if you do it.
Yeah.
So Krasimir, why don't you bring us home and talk a bit about your dreams?
Well, I already said make things easier for application grammars. And this new feature that you mentioned, this is something nice to have in mind when I implement the next runtime, because they will change a lot of things. But bidirectionality should not be challenged by neither of these two suggested extensions.
It occurs to me now to ask you, Krasimir, the majestic runtime, will it make obsolete the idea of using bind to construct tokens at runtime, basically?
No.
Would it? So we couldn't suddenly have millions of tokens waiting in the database to be used.
Oh, okay. You can have a bigger database, but I guess still, if you use bind, you can make the database smaller. So then,
I see. Okay. Because there seems to be some. There seems to be some. What is lost when you do what we are doing with the Zulu is the full form lexicon, which has various uses, and so it would actually be nice to have that somehow still. We can just rewrite our resource grammar when you're done.
Is the set of tokens still finite?
Yes, it should be, or at least I think it should be written as though it's finite. I don't think Zulu has the property where you can just keep on adding morphemes ad infinitum. Good question.
Because in Swedish you can say far, 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 or far, more, and then you keep adding. I've never seen this kind of long concatenation, but it's possible in principle.
Could you say something, Krasimir, about this idea of dynamic lexicons? Maybe you talked about it in another talk, which I wasn't present for. But I know that, of course, you've been thinking about this for a long time, and you maybe have some more concrete ideas now. Can you repeat those and say kind of what the status is, or what you see the way forward as being?
Well, there is nothing fundamentally difficult. The problem is that to achieve it, you have to rewrite the runtime. And it should be possible that the problem with the current C runtime is that there are a lot of things pointing to each other. And if you update one thing, then you have to update all of the references. And then also in Haskell, since everything is pure functions, if you change the grammar, then you should also keep the old version just to maintain the referential transparency in Haskell. So what I started, and by the way, I can already read the after syntax of a PGF and read it inside a new runtime. But that's the only thing that you can do right now. The idea is that you have a file, which is a database, and in that file you can have many different versions of the same PGF with some alternations. And then as long as someone else needs the old version, it's retained. Once it's not necessary, then it's released. And then there should be transactions and everything else that you would expect in a database. to achieve this, what's called persistence, I, for example, instead of using mutable maps as in the current runtime, I use balanced trees like in Haskell. And well, there should be also some version control at some point if you want to merge two different versions of the grammar. The idea is also that when you load a GF grammar, now everything is loaded in memory. So you have two things in memory, the GFO file and the PGF, the party build PGF. And they both take space. What you need instead is that you start loading the grammar, and then as long as you read one module, you just insert n number of abstract functions in the database, and the database itself doesn't stay in memory. There should be commands in the shell like add linearization, drop linearization, and well, like in SQL, you can create tables, you can alter, drop, and etc.
What about this idea?
And those commands should be runnable at runtime.
This issue that I mean, when you're adding lexicon entries, you want to use the smart paradigms basically. So those need to be retained, but they're kind of not.
Yes. Yes, it should be optional together with the compiled code to save also the source code in the PGF. Actually, the PGF should also allow you to save arbitrary semantic information because, for example, in WordNet, I have the graph, I have the glosses, and you might have, yes, there is also statistical model. And in every application, you want to add other things. So if it's a database, why not store whatever else you want inside linked with the grammar? So the source code should be there, and then the compiler should be able to read it from there.
So would you make it open for all kinds of meta information like dependency tables and dependency labels?
Yeah, that's the idea. You should be able to do it. I want to have API similar to Dyson, where you can run SQL-like queries, but in Haskell, not in SQL.
This is like a great idea. I mean, amongst all the other great ideas, and often the case is that it kind of depends on the dedication of really one person to do it. And I mean, that's been true of many things.
Yes, and
well, all I was going to say is, how can do we have any ideas of how to get away from this? So maybe, you want to do something else, or you have other priorities, but other people want it. Of course, since it's open source, anyone can start, but in reality, often it's not the way things happen.
Well, it's a bottleneck, definitely, and I don't have that much time, and it actually requires a lot of effort.
Yes.
So I would like to have some contributions. When we worked on the first version of the current runtime, the very first version, we worked together with Bjorn and Arne, but nowadays I'm the only or the main person, maybe not the main, there are some other contributions, who is cracking with these things. And if I start from scratch, then this would be a chance for someone to jump in and make something better. And this time I also have the ambition to also document the design. I started with one markdown file which just describes the goals of the new implementation. And there should be also some details about the design in general, like something like a living article instead of article that I write at the end when everything is done.
And in addition, you are working with this huge WordNet related project. So
yes, and the runtime is one of the things that I would like to have in the WordNet. Yes. And maybe I can now focus more on the runtime and keep the WordNet just incremental.
But there, I think it should be a bit more easy to get other developers join you than, because, for instance, it mainly needs GF programming, whereas in the runtime you need C and Haskell and whatever.
Well, even if someone is just working on the bindings in Haskell and Python, this would still be a great help. I have just started, for example, to implement also the Haskell binding just because I want to do a test suite in Haskell rather than in C. Working on tests, that would be another thing, or documenting things.
We had an expression of interest in the chat.
Oh, great. You're in, Andreas.
I would like to add at this point that in the past, I don't know, a few weeks, months, really, there's been quite a lot of activity on the GF core repository, and lots of it has been from Singapore, and it's been kind of really exciting to see. So it feels like with a little bit of additional resources, lots can be done actually. And I, at least personally, have the impression that sometimes I feel like I don't have time for something, and then when I see other people are working on it, suddenly I find that I do have time for it. So it's a kind of a single spark can start a wildfire, maybe.
Oh, it's up to the motivation.
Yeah, well, that's exactly it. That's a fickle thing,
GF is
isn't it,
under-resorted language.
Okay. Do we have any more comments before we wrap up this thing? Anyone who hasn't had their voice heard yet? So I've been trying to take notes of everything, combining chat and voice, body language. And so maybe at some point soon I will try to compile this into something legible and include it in the repository there, along with everything else. And so to me, Hal, and to Arne, and to anyone else, if they have something that they feel belongs, is part of the materials of the discussion, please add it there as well. So if no one has anything else to say, then I will thank you, everyone, and you may go back to sleep to continue your dreams. Revisit them in another 2 years, perhaps.
Yes.
Yes, thanks very much.
Yes, exactly.
It's been mentally very comforting for me to be even able to say this somewhere, right? So I'm already very calm and I'm ready to go to sleep. So.
Yeah, Michael, I really appreciate this. I would not, I guess what you are aiming at is much better than the RNP things that we have.
Yeah, well, it's easy to invent things that don't exist, right?
Just in case if you were not aware of that, so at least it solved the problems for the Swedish grammars at the time when it was built more than 10 years ago, I think. Yeah.
Well, I'll look at that. I'm skeptical.
And as Krasimir said, it should be expanded, just like the reflexivity in RGL is too limited, and I think it was Krasimir who extended it for the WordNet grammar a long time ago. So yeah,
it's one thing to have reflexive pronouns and phrases in the resource grammar, and it's another to be able to write application grammars where it's easy to recognize situations where you're supposed to use them and where you're not supposed to use them.
Yeah, no, that's
my complaint is really about the second part of that.
Okay, yeah. Fair enough. Yes,
yeah.
That's true. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks.
It's been really good.
So tomorrow is well, yeah, we'll
tomorrow,
see.
Yeah, tomorrow 8 p.m. Singapore time, participant projects. So the concluding thing. Bring your beer, whatever.
Okay.